Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Reading the Signs podcast. I'm Dr. Jim Dolan, and I'm here with Rick Hinshaw. Today, we will be discussing Catholic education. This is such a critical and wide-ranging topic, but we will try to limit our discussion to just the formal education that takes place outside of the home. Rick, let's begin by talking about the education that takes place on the collegiate level, beginning with Notre Dame University, America's preeminent Catholic college. They recently created a controversy when they appointed a pro-abortion activist to head up one of their academic departments. Now, this is very concerning because they put someone into a leadership position who has outwardly expressed hostility and disdain for Catholic teaching on abortion and has expressed contempt for the life-saving work performed at crisis pregnancy centers. Now, Notre Dame has defended their action by saying that the person they put in that role is an accomplished political scientist and legal scholar. But Rick, is this a simple example of a school just trying to expose their students to diverse views? Or is it one more instance of a Catholic college succumbing to pressures from sectors of our society that are hostile to our church's views on moral issues?
Thanks, Jim. Well, obviously, I'm not in a position to read the minds of the people who made this decision, but all we need to do is look at some of the facts here. This is not somebody who just takes a position that, well, I don't agree that abortion should be prohibited in every case. There are the hard cases, or I'm against abortion personally, but I can't tell somebody else what to do. This is somebody who's been actively out there writing article after article defending abortion on demand, and as you just pointed out, disparaging the pro-life position and those who hold it, comparing the pro-life position to white supremacy thinking, to racism. Now, by doing this, this person, this Dr. Osterman, is disparaging the University of Notre Dame in the same way. And they've responded to this by emphasizing how pro-life they are, how committed they are to protecting the sanctity of life from the moment of conception. Well, then they are being compared to white supremacists.
Good
And the
point.
entire church is being compared to racists and white supremacists. Her attacks on pro-life crisis pregnancy centers, taking all of the pro-abortion falsehoods that are put forward to try to discredit these largely volunteer centers that are doing what the pro-choice community says they want, offering women a choice. They're simply offering them services to give them the opportunity to choose life rather than just be pressured into an abortion. So this is somebody who is adamantly pro-abortion. One of the student leader of the pro-life organization at Notre Dame. She's an adopted Chinese national, and she points out that this woman worked as a member of the Population Council, which collaborated with the Chinese government in their promotion of abortion, contraception, and their brutal imposition of a one-child policy that included forced abortions for families where the mother became pregnant and they already had a child. So she's involved with the organization that committed those kinds of atrocities. We're not, again, talking about somebody who takes a so-called soft pro-choice position here. So let me, if I could just briefly, Pope St. John Paul II in 1994 issued an apostolic constitution, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, on Catholic universities. And he made clear, that the work of a Catholic university is to work within the broader culture to contribute the thought and teaching of the Catholic Church and the ministries of the Church to efforts in the larger society to improve the human condition, to dialogue with others in the search for truth, but also to have a certainty in the font of truth, which in the view of the Catholic Church is the Spirit and the teachings that come down to us, from Scripture and from revealed truth in the Catholic Church. And what they're emphasizing is that the the mission of the Catholic Church incorporates fidelity to the Christian message as it comes to us through the church. And Pope John Paul said, a Catholic university research necessarily includes an integration of knowledge, a dialogue between faith and reason, an ethical concern, and a theological perspective. And the Pope, in putting forward the institutional, the general norms that should inform Catholic teaching, again, open to discussing and dialoguing with other viewpoints, but not compromising fundamental truths of the Catholic
and putting
faith.
someone in a leadership position who's going to persuade and influence their students, because the students are so intimidated, and these students feel a responsibility to incorporate the points of view of their professors and leadership. Do you mind, Rick? I want to tell a little story about my experience in my philosophy class as a third-year college student. This was in the 1970s, during the height of the sexual revolution. And when the topic of human sexuality came to the point where we had to discuss it in class, I was certain that my college professor was going to express a sympathetic view toward the liberal attitudes on human sexuality, because it was the dominant view, it was the dominant perspective in society at that time. But he did just the opposite. You know what my professor did? He instead of trying to be politically correct, he explained why Catholic teaching is the rational, cogent, and morally correct position. I was so taken aback by what he had to say at that time, but I realized that his arguments were logical and they were based on objective evidence and scientific fact. Nevertheless, I repeatedly tried to punch holes in his argument. I can recall at least 2 occasions when I followed him to his car, debating with him the issue. But he held firm, and that was because he was espousing a truth. Now, here's the thing with truth. It's unchangeable. It's never changeable. And I finally realized that he was right. He was right. So I was at an impressionable point in my life, and thank God that I was exposed, and I had this particular college professor, Dr. Joseph Califano, and I have to give him a lot of credit for how strong and how capable he was and patient he was with me and actually with all the students. But here's my concern. Not to say that 100% of the faculty at colleges have to be Catholic, but they should be above 50%. At Notre Dame, only 50% of the professors are Catholic. And many other Catholic colleges, it's more like 40% of them are Catholic. So the hiring and promoting people into influential leadership roles who don't really align themselves with Catholic teaching. So my fear is that there's not enough Dr. Joseph Califanos around any longer. They're not standing for truth, and they don't seem to have the courage to do what's right.
Yeah, and the point is, and that's what Pope John Paul, and he said that Catholic universities, more than 50% of the faculty should be Catholic. And he said that Catholics should be committed to delivering the truths of the faith. Faculty who are not Catholic, whether they hold another religion or no religious belief at all, should be committed to understanding and respecting the doctrines and teachings of the Catholic Church. And again, you look at this Professor Osterman at Notre Dame, not just saying she disagrees with the church on abortion, but really defaming pro-life people and institutions, including the Catholic Church and Notre Dame University, as racist. It's an absurd contention. You pointed out on a show a few weeks ago that we did, the idea of how racial minorities are the targets of the abortion industry and disproportionately abort their children. And you go back to Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. She wasn't for a limited population overall. She was for limiting certain populations. She said more children from the fit, less from the unfit. Those obviously in a class sense, those in poverty, but always racial and ethnic minorities are the targets of this kind of thinking. And so for Notre Dame University to elevate a person like this, it almost makes them seem like a self-loathing Catholic entity. And of course, a further point, as you're pointing about, what are the percentages of Catholics on the faculty, and how many of those Catholics are truly believing
Yeah.
Catholics, prepared and capable of defending the teachings of the church. I had an instance, this was a Catholic high school, not a college, but way back years ago, and I was giving a pro-life talk. They invited me in, and one of the students asked the question about, well, if the church is so against abortion, why don't they allow artificial birth control? And I wasn't really well schooled in that issue at that time. I answered as best I could, and then the teacher, and this was a Catholic religion class in a Catholic high school, spoke up and said, the church's teaching is not nearly as restrictive as people think on artificial contraception, which was at the very least, even from his perspective, an overly simplistic answer. So, that's part of the problem too. If Notre Dame is elevating people like this to head departments, how conscientious are they that the Catholic faculty they have are actually conversant
Good
with
point.
and committed to teaching the Catholic faith?
So let's get at the why, Rick. It's obvious that these schools are moving away from their original mission and from their Catholic moral foundation. But I do have to cite one more example where things went awry. There is the situation at St. John's University, and to a lesser extent at Seton Hall University, where the organization Turning Point USA, you can have your opinion about them one way or the other, but their chapters have applied for formal recognition by the college, but they've been rejected. Now you might say, well, they were rejected because of their stance on the death penalty, which is opposed to Catholic teaching. But on the other hand, in particular with St. John's University, they have a dedicated LGBTQ plus center. They house biological men who claim to be transgender in the same dormitories as women. So obviously they are supporting practices and attitudes that are completely opposite to church's teachings on critical moral issues. So we can't say that Turning Point USA was denied this status because of their different view, because the schools are already allowing for far left liberal views to be sanctioned by the school in terms of their organizational status. But they're blocking the expression of conservative views, at least in this instance. So what's going on? The diverse views argument is really not what's going on, I don't think. There's more to it than that. Now, I hate to think that they're being driven only for financial reasons, but it could also be, as you said, Rick, not only are they succumbing to pressures from external forces, but they may be succumbing to pressures from internal forces within their own organization to get them to change their positions on things. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why is it financial? Do you think the schools? Well, I'll elaborate on that a little bit. I could support the argument that it's a financial motivation because since the year 2010, except in prestigious schools, highly competitive schools such as Notre Dame, they're doing okay with enrollment, and the demand to go to those schools is still quite remarkable. But the middle of the road Catholic colleges, more like a St. John's University, their enrollment has declined by 15% over the past 15 years. Nationwide, college enrollment has nosedived since 2010. So on a certain level, I mean, obviously, these people who run these colleges are just as smart as you and I. When a person is feeling threatened or an organization is feeling threatened, you try to take measures to preserve yourself or the organization. So you can say that since there's been such a liberalization of attitudes towards abortion and on sexual practices, the schools are making a business decision to try to appeal to a greater percentage of the high school students who are graduating, but it's a shrinking pool. So how to attract those students to come to their college and not to turn them away because they have such conservative views. So they need their money is what is coming across to some extent. They need their enrollment, and it's causing the schools to prioritize finances above what's morally correct.
Oh, that's probably part of it, Jim. I think there's also a desire to kind of, this has been a problem for the Catholic Church in America since the days of immigration, the early immigration, that there is this desire to fit into the mainstream. And I saw some of this working for the diocese when it came to Catholic education at the elementary and secondary level, high schools and elementary schools. This desire to be accepted by the overall education establishment. So we don't want to be too rigid in our thinking, because we want to be part. And certainly the idea that uh, uh, Catholic young people coming up, they're forming different views depending on the influences they're facing as they grow up, depending on their own families. And so a lot of them may have more liberal views with regard to this kind of thing. But it is interesting that there's an openness. Bill Donahue at the Catholic League did something on this not too long ago. There's a group. It's a free speech group, and its initials are FIRE, fire, and I forget what it stands for, but it's an advocacy for free speech, and they rate colleges according to their level of free speech. And some of the major Catholic colleges, including Notre Dame, and Bill Donahue was pointing out a number of Jesuit Catholic colleges flunking grades according to this one organization in terms of their protection of free speech. And yet Bill points out, but one area where they're very open to free speech is with regard to pro-abortion. All of them have pro-choice organizations within their Catholic community at their colleges. So it does seem like it's almost more of an ideological, but we don't want to seem too conservative, too rigid on church teaching. So, and some conservative political group, we don't really want to open the doors to them, but we need to be open to LGBT groups and pro-abortion groups and whatnot. And, part of it goes back to, what do families and parents want out of Catholic education?
Before you go off on that point, Rick, because I know that you can elaborate on that, and we need to hear more about that. But I do have to throw out there, I also wonder to what extent these Catholic colleges fear the media. That if the schools adhere strictly to Catholic teaching and they are not overly accommodating to these liberal organizations, I think they're afraid that they're going to get attacked by the media, and again, that could hurt enrollment. But I do want to talk about a point that we discussed a little while ago, Rick, but I do also know that we should talk about what you were about to say about the parents. But to me, not Catholic colleges, all colleges, they're a racket. They've turned into a racket. The tuition is off the charts. It far exceeds inflation. And you know what? You know what's a stunning statistic? Only on the average, 65% of these students who are paying enormous amounts of money to go to these schools, only 65% are graduating. And then only 42% of them are getting jobs in the fields where they were educated.
Yeah.
So, but again, these Catholic colleges, they know this. They're enticing students to come to their schools when they know that only 2/3 of them are going to graduate, and a high percentage of them will not get the jobs in the fields that they were going to school for. But they're, again, looking to keep that enrollment high to stay in business. And I have some suggestions on where they should go from here, but let me hear what you had to say about the parents.
Well, let me comment on that. Yeah, one of the things that's happened in going back 20 or 30 years now is the federal government really took over most of the loan programs for college loans, and so colleges and universities, they kind of calculate, well, what's our appeal? What level of income would want to come to our school, depending what we have to offer and whatnot. So if they see that their average enrollees can say afford say $20,000 a year for tuition, but now there's a federal program where they can borrow up to another 20,000. Well, we'll just hike it to 40,000. And so then the students and their families are assuming all this debt, but they're hearing all of these promises from the education system about, well, if you borrow this money and get this education, you're going to have a great job. And some of the study programs in college, I mean, gender studies now is a big one, all kinds of offbeat kind of studies where the only jobs you could get would be teaching those studies.
And they lead nowhere.
Really for it. And they go nowhere. So there is this real exploitation of the system, and we read so many articles now about how colleges are so top heavy with administrative personnel, and half the courses, if not more, are being taught by graduate assistants, not full-fledged professors, because the money is being spent when professors want to get promoted. They're getting into the top heavy administrative level. So there's all that to be concerned about. And so in many ways, parents and families have to be discerning. But I think, one of the things that, I know, again, Bill Donahue mentioned in one of his releases, and he used to talk about it with me, just talking with his friends about, where he'd be talking to somebody and say, oh, my kid's going to Georgetown or Boston College Law School. And Bill would say, well, they got pro-abortion groups on campus. Yeah, but, the reputation of those schools, what a job my kid's going to get with that on his resume. And that's what some parents are looking for. And I go back, when I was at the Catholic League, we had a spate of issues where Catholic schools would have to fire or not renew the contracts of teachers who, after committing to live publicly according to Catholic teachings while they were at the school, were not doing so. Most of the cases, it was a man teacher marrying another man very publicly. And the school said, well, we can't have that. That contradicts our teaching. And there were cases where the parents were getting involved against the school and the church, holding demonstrations in front of the school or picketing the bishop's office. So there is this sense, and this goes back to decades, generations of poor catechesis, where a lot of Catholics, Catholic parents, Catholic families are not committed to Catholic teachings. And the colleges see that. If they don't have the ingrained commitment themselves, they'll talk the talk. They'll come up with some things. Notre Dame, after the whole controversy when they gave an award to President Obama, then the president of the school started leading their contingent at the March for Life each year. So they'll do some things to show the flag. But in other ways like this, they do things that are so contradictory and so confusing to their students. And if the families that are patronizing these schools do not demand it. Now, there are, you mentioned the enrollment issue. There are Catholic schools that are solid. Dr. Ann
why don't you talk a little bit about Franciscan University in, I think they're in Ohio. Steubenville, Ohio.
Yeah.
I mentioned about the 65% graduation rate. They have an 85% graduation rate. Large colleges that are concerned about enrollment, such as Notre Dame, well, they have less of a concern than schools like Seton Hall or St. John's University, for sure. Franciscan University, and there's another Catholic college that comes to mind, Christendom University in Virginia. Students are clamoring to go to those schools. They're looking for high quality Catholic educations, and they're much less expensive, and they are viable alternatives to these Catholic institutions that have a watered down approach to Catholicism. So I think what we should be thinking about, and I have to mention one other thing that I think large Catholic colleges see as a threat, is the development or increased recognition of the benefits of apprenticeship programs, where someone can learn a skill and get paid while doing so, as opposed to going to a school where you learn stuff and you have a humongous debt when you graduate.
Right.
And there's only and if you graduate.
Well, let me
Go ahead. Let's talk a
Dr.
little bit.
Ann Henderson, a well-known Catholic author and scholar who now teaches. She's a professor of sociology and heads the Veritas Center at Franciscan University in Steubenville. And she wrote a book in 2024, A Lamp in the Darkness: How Faithful Catholic Colleges Are Helping to Save the Church. And she goes into some of these. She also goes into some of the abuses you mentioned, opportunities to work, to get internships or other things. She mentions some of these Catholic colleges that actually have internships to Planned Parenthood. So, but the schools like Franciscan, you mentioned Christendom, Ave Maria, the University of Dallas. There are a number of them now. They're a bit smaller. They're not the humongous universities like Notre Dame and Georgetown, but they are growing, and they're growing because there's a demand for that kind of solid Catholic teaching. I would mention to any Catholics who are interested in finding out more about that, there is the Cardinal Newman Society, which publishes an annual directory on Catholic colleges and universities and recommends them. And that's a very solid organization, and they recommend schools like the ones I've just mentioned and many others. So any parents looking for a good, solid Catholic college or university, and a young people looking for it as well, just Google Cardinal Newman Society, and this directory will come up, and you'll be able to check their directory to see what schools are doing well. Yeah, schools like Franciscan, where two of my children went, and tremendous school. Doesn't have the academic reputation of a Notre Dame or a Georgetown, but it's a solid academic school. But it's also preparing Catholic young people. When I forget, it was my daughter or my son's graduation, but the president of the university stood up at the graduation and he told the students, "You are now prepared to go on to the front lines in the battle against the culture of death." And one story that viewers will appreciate, the priest who really turned Franciscan in that direction. It had been around for years, since I think the 30s or 40s, but Father Michael Scanlon assumed the presidency of it in the early 70s, and he moved it very strongly in that direction of orthodoxy. And one of the things he did, well, was a perpetual adoration chapel there on the campus, and right adjacent to that, there is a burial site that's a monument to unborn children, and there are several bodies of unborn children there. And when we were taking the tour before my daughter went, the tour guide, he was showing us that, and he said when Father Scanlon first created this tomb here, he got a call from a official in the city of Steubenville telling him that this was a violation of their code. You couldn't have human remains buried there. And Father Scanlon on the phone said to him, "Okay, just for the record, you're acknowledging officially as a government official that these are human babies buried there."
Very good.
And the conversation shortly ended, and they never challenged it any further. But Father Scanlon was a visionary, and he had the courage to run with this, and other schools have followed suit. So they are out there. Unfortunately, though, schools like Notre Dame, there are many alumni who are not happy when they see these kinds of things. They have to speak out. They're the donors. They hold some of the purse strings, and they have to get the message across.
These large Catholic colleges, they have to go back to the basics. I know you weren't a Yankee fan, or you were not a Yankee fan, but I was a big Yankee fan. I remember one of the Yankees who I really liked a lot, Bernie Williams. He was an outstanding player, and he was in a slump. And I remember being startled to find out the way that he was working himself out of his slump. He was hitting off a tee, like a little leaguer, practicing his swing to try to straighten out his swing, hitting off a tee, going back to the basics. That's how the Catholic colleges, these large Catholic colleges that are losing their way, they need to go back to the basics and be more like the Steubenville College, the Franciscan College in Steubenville, and others like you mentioned. But this also kind of ties into the teachings from Pope Benedict, who said that we need a smaller, more muscular, more pure church that is a fortification against secular society that espouses these anti-church, anti-life views. Do you agree that there's a lot to what Pope Benedict the
Yeah, I
16th
mean,
said?
obviously, you don't want to talk about reducing the numbers in the church, but that's happening anyway. We see our churches here on Long Island are half full at best. Our schools continue to close because there's just not enough. Yes, the population is decreasing here, but there are not enough strong Catholics to fill our churches and fill our schools. So, seeing that that's the case, let's rally those Catholics who are still strong in the faith. Let's invite them in for their input in what's needed, and let's give a strong, compelling faith that draws people in, like the young people who value the Latin Mass. I was never really a Latin Mass devotee, but in recent times, I actually an attempt to discourage those young families from the Latin Mass that they find such substance in. So let's find out what motivates younger people and younger families to get stronger in the faith, and let's support them in that, not water it down so that they wonder, what's the point. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for today. This one's gone very quickly, but thank you all for watching. We invite you to join us again. Our next show, I think we're going to talk about Holy Week and Easter coming up. Our next show will be just probably at the beginning of Holy Week. So we'll talk about some of the devotions, some of the practices during that week as we prepare for celebrating Easter Sundays. Thank you again for joining us.
See you then.